thank you bait saying I was least. No, I was kidding.
So we can't. I can't hear Marty. Can you guys?
No,
I
it looks
can't
like
hear Marty right now.
his hands are moving. We can't hear him.
He's pleading to somebody for forgiveness.
Sam.
Probably me. No,
Yeah.
Dang it,
Wow.
that was
So
great.
when
I
you
wish-
mute yourself so you can go and fix the stream and you can't hear
Right.
people typing on the keyboard. This is classic. If you ever listen to our
great.
show, this is just classic us at this point. We're going to rewind this amazing discussion that we've had for the past 5 minutes because we were not live. So I apologize for all those that are sitting there waiting and watching. We are now live. My name is Marty. Welcome to the intro to Historical Games. It's featured on the San Diego Historical Convention online. We're going to get this real quick because I know we're limited in time. So we're here to talk about what is an historical game. What are some types of historical games you might be wanting to get into? And we want to know why you are here. Let us know in the chat. Why are you here? Are you interested in basically, I don't have any clue what you consider a historical game, or I'm just here for suggestions. And let's go around the horn and introduce everybody. First, we have an illustrious designer with us, David Thompson, who is known for many games such as Resist, Pavlov's House, and most recently for the Undaunted series. David, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I will say that what I said in that original 5 minutes was the most insightful thing I've ever conveyed in any discussion ever. But I'm not repeating it. I'm not repeating.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then you know her, you love her. You see her on podcasts and video streams over on BGG. She does an amazing interview series over there on her podcast. Candace, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Marty, so much. Awesome introduction. And I also just kind of pretty much told everyone how to solve the world peace problem and climate change. I came up everything. I just solved it, and I can't repeat it now. I just can't repeat it.
So here's the thing. I usually use Twitch and rarely YouTube Live, and there's a big red button on YouTube that says go live. All right. And then finally, I'm not going to make the same joke I did before. You see him all over the place. He does makes so much amazing content and videos, does things on social media. Lord of the Board. And if you want to know anything about the game Root, he's the guy you go see. Sam, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Whew. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to rewind this all the way back to the top. It looks like we're on. People are putting in questions. I think the first question that we had that we already have our answers to, so we'll just repeat them, is what is your definition of a board game? And Candace wants you of an historical board game.
Of a board game?
What's the definition of an historical board game? Candace, kick us off.
So I consider a historical board game to be a board game that covers some aspect of history, and not necessarily just this setting is something historical or somewhere historical, but that the mechanisms actually help you kind of relive the historical event that occurred that the game is trying to portray. Also, I would say that they're very educational, and they will often include a significant amount of historical background text, which is another way you can kind of learn about it and get into it. And then it allows you to kind of experience all sides, like in a war game, multiple sides of the conflict that's happening. They're not all war games. There are lots of different historical games for everyone. And I think one of the things that got me really excited about them was that I was never into history growing up. Never. Did not like history. I don't know if I just didn't have great teachers or what, but it wasn't my thing until I discovered history, learning about history through board games. And there's just something that is really fascinating to me about game design in general. But then when you take a historical game design and you think about all of the historical research that the designer or designers did to create the game and how it kind of seeps through as you play it, I find that really fascinating. So that's what I would say a historical game is and kind of captures.
David or
Yeah,
Sam?
and I think, well, before we started, Sam we were having a discussion about the game Brian Baru, right? And from my perspective, I'll give 2 example games, and I'll explain why I think one is historical and one is not. So my latest game I've been super passionate about is Votes for Women, right? Which I think is clearly a historical game. And Brian Baru, which like Candace, it was probably my favorite game of 2020, 2021, whatever year it came out, which I don't think is a historical game. And the reason for that is I think, look at the designer's intent. So when Tori Brown, the designer of Votes for Women, was creating that game, she wanted to design a game about women's suffrage. And then she created the game. When Pierre Sylvester, I'm guessing, I could be wrong, I don't think he started with the history of Brian Baru, right? He designed an amazing game because he's a brilliant game designer. And then, this is a reasonable theme to apply. And you can usually tell what the sort of design intent, and that's how I would, that's what I would use to classify.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't know what my definition of it. It's so, that's the thing is like, I'm probably, I'm with Marty where I'm kind of newer to the wargaming and also historical gaming scene in general. So for me, the way that I even got into the wider scope was by playing games like Brian Boru is a great example, just because it was a historical theme. I love like a lot of Celtic and Irish history because it's like in my own personal heritage. So to kind of pick up that game and just have even just a simple theme like that and know that, for him to unite the Ireland at that time, he used marriage, keeping the Danes away, but also making those relationships with those churches and monasteries. I thought that was like, it was super abstracted, but it was like enough to get me to be like, man, I really love this. I think it's cool. And then again, I am a huge history buff, so that probably helps that I just like history. But I would agree that if the intent isn't there, then it probably wouldn't be classified as like what we're talking about here today. But it could definitely be like a stepping tool into the games where they are kind of the mission of that game. So yeah, I don't know. I think I just like all of history. So as long as it's celebrating even a part of history, even if the game was there and it was just kind of a theme, I think it's still kind of a historical game. Just kind of depends on how you would have interacted with it. Because for me, Brian Baru, like I loved it because then I was like out there kind of researching Brian Baru after. The game didn't do it, but I think the game. So sorry, the way that the game was presented wasn't like calling me to do that, but I think I was just inspired to do that by playing it. So that's kind of an interesting discussion.
Yeah, and I think that like everything, there's a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
That could be on the further side compared to like something like Votes for Women, of the spectrum. But like if it got you excited to like learn more about someone in history, some time in history, I think you could consider it a historical board game.
Yeah.
I think also too is for me is like you said, the intent is to try to recreate as close as possible a tabletop experience that's kind of replaying out an historical event. For me, I'm more likely to give it, okay, you're an historical game because that's your intent and your goal. I mean, we've played a lot of dry Euros, right? From you're trying to get resources from some point in time in the Renaissance period, and you're trying to turn those in over here in order to create victory points. There's a historical theme there, but I definitely would not consider that, personally an historical game. And y'all have also talked about some of the appeals. I have the same appeal. I'm actually going to do a full podcast on this sometime. My appeal in games has totally done almost a 360 since I first started. I used to get into games through theme. I found, I really want to play this because I like the theme. But then after a while, I found out, wow, there are really a lot of crappy games out there that have a really cool theme. Why is it this Transformers game from 1998 any good? And so I said, okay, forget the theme. I want mechanics. I want something that's good and fun. And then recently I found like, my gosh, a lot of the games are so similar. Now I was like, I want theme and I want mechanics. And I'm finding that the historical games for me is what brings both of those in light because I love to learn. And then a lot of them have some really cool mechanics involved. So that's good. So and by the way, we intentionally use the term historical game and not war game because we also want to talk a little about maybe some of the barriers that people may be intimidated by historical games. I think one is, oh my gosh, it's a war game. And I've seen these people play war games, and it's these people with these really teeny tiny little pieces of cardboard on a map for hours, and they're just using tweezers and moving them around. I'm out. You know, and that is part of it, but there's more to it than just simulating a war concept. So, just out of curiosity, for people who are maybe, it's like, I don't know if I want to get into this, what are some of the barriers that y'all saw before you got into historical games? One was, I assumed it was long and complicated.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, no. You go ahead, David. I'm more interested in your answer, so go for
it. Well, I think there's kind of, in my mind, there's three what I would say are obvious barriers, right? So one is what you were alluding to, Marty. Like there's a stereotype, especially war games, historical games in general, are long and complex, right? And that is certainly true of some of them, and it's absolutely not true of others. There's another sort of stereotype that they all have dry and thick rule books, right? Again, oftentimes true. And then the last one is just an objectively true thing about a person's taste, and that is some people just don't like conflict, right? Like they like, you know, and I don't mean you know, head to head, like in chess where I'm going to directly take your piece or whatever. I mean like actual military conflicts, right? So that last one's a personal taste thing, and it's just, it is what it is. The first two, I would just say that historical games and war games run the gamut, just like any other kind of, right? So, while historically that may have been more true than it is now we're in like a golden age of options, both in the war game space and the historical game space in terms of complexity and, you know, elegant rules and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think my main barrier was honestly the rule books, because when I was trying to kind of get into it, I chose, because here's the other thing is that I feel like with historical games, you also want to be semi-passionate about the historical theme, because that's going to help you go a long way with actually learning the game. If you don't have any passion for that time period, it's going to be hard for you to like want to put in the effort to learn the game, in my opinion. So for me, it was like a lot of medieval stuff and ancient history, because that's my favorite period. So when I first started, I just got a ton of stuff that was ancient history type and medieval era. And yeah, one of the things that I ran into was just kind of rule books with lacking a lot of examples and diagrams in them. And then there was actually two rule books. There's like the playbook, and then there's the rule book. And I was like, why do we not just have one book with examples and pictures? And I'm like going between two books. I was like, okay, I get it now. Like now I get it. But it took a while for me to like really get into that, because it's daunting. I mean, they're really big books too. They're not small. And it's like the game's complexity ends up being similar to that of other games of the same complexity with much smaller rule books. And that kind of confused me. So it's almost like they used more words, but then there's also historical pieces in there threaded, and that's awesome. But it does make the rule books look really daunting. But yeah, there's like full history pages within those books too. So you kind of got to realize the rule book's not actually that big. Just a lot of things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that's been said so far, and I 100% would agree that the rule book is a challenge. And you know, another barrier is that a lot of historical games and strategy games and war games don't have a whole lot of good video content yet compared to other modern board games. So it's like, you know, early on, I think Comancheria was the first game, which is a GMT solo game by Joel Toppin, and it's awesome. I found it on somebody's like hidden gems solo game list, and I was like, that sounds really cool. I'm gonna get it. And I saw all those like 3.2.1, like I'm like, what is this? But the playbook actually helped me significantly. Like I do love the playbook because I love setting up the game and then reading along and moving my pieces the way it's telling me to, because it's helping me grasp why I'm doing things and like mechanically how to do things. So I do think the playbooks are helpful, and I'm actually disappointed when I don't have a good playbook in a war game at this point, especially some of the heavier ones. But again, they're in comparison to other modern board games and Euros and everything, it's a lot easier to like go on YouTube, search for that game, and find like 10 different videos you can watch to get a feel for it. And these games are often a little more complex and different. So it's definitely a barrier that there aren't enough videos on these games. But I think like everything, it's growing. It's getting better. More and more people are getting into them. More content. You know, Rodney's into I think Rodney and I got into the coin series at the same time, and it's awesome because you could play those remotely too, which we did play distant playing together. But it's catching on because I think people are seeing that, you know, there's more to them than, you know, that original stereotype you might have from the past of walking by somebody with, you know, a huge map set up, all these little chits out there. Like, ugh. I thought, like, you know, looking at some of those games as I kind of progressed, and I'm still consider myself very much amateur beginner in this whole scene. But when I first started playing, you know, the coin series kind of looks like Euro games, and it's got area control. So that was a good barrier to entry for me. But then, and at that point, I was like looking at the games with all the hex encounters, you know, I was like, ooh, I don't think I would ever play one of those. Next thing you know, a year later, I have them because it kind of just gets you juiced up. And like, you know, the more you play, the more you want to play. And the more I wish, again, that there was more great video content on some of these games because I want to understand them faster. But yeah, so I think like the rules for sure, and the lack of videos, and also again the stereotype those are definitely some barriers to entry. But it's getting better. It's getting better. And also one more thing to add to that is historically, a lot of games are covering certain, like we have tons of World War II games, you know, but now there's been this push, this renaissance of creating games from different historical backgrounds, from people with different historical backgrounds, different historical topics. So it's just like really exciting to like read about some game and like, you know, some period of history that you're like, I didn't even know that was going on. I'm excited to experience that and try that. So it's changing. It's getting better and better. So hop on board.
There was a comment in the chat from Ricardo that said, the issue is that many war game rule books actually imply prior knowledge of basic concepts like zones of control, combat ratios, what a modifier is, command range,
100%.
etc., which is true, which is why we hope that the games that we're getting ready to kind of recommend, hopefully we've kind of parse these down to where, no, you don't need any prior knowledge. And before we get into that, to roll back to the whole playbook thing and how recently for me, that playbook has just made games more enjoyable. This past week, I played a brand new GMT game called Banish the Snakes. It's about basically the patron saints in Ireland trying to convert Christians, pagans to Christians. So there's by the way, the rule book, super short, 12 pages, 13 pages. I'm going to recommend this on an intro when we get to it. So I said, let's look at the playbook, and it goes through each of the different saints. And I thought, this is absolutely amazing. So one thing, St. Patrick, we just celebrated St. Patrick's Day. As a child, St. Patrick was kidnapped and sold into slavery and was actually a slave in Ireland for many years. He escaped, wanted to devote his life to the church, and he wanted to go back to where he was a slave to try to help people there. And I thought, how freaking cool is that? I never knew anything like that. And that whole period you hear about, I was like, oh man, this is probably bad because there's, you know, the Crusades were a horrible time. This was totally different, where the people, they were working together. There was no violence in any of these patrons and everything. They just wanted to try to help the people there and just teach them their ways and everything like that. That playbook opened up the game for me, that when I played it, I was like, oh, y'all, let me tell you about this saint that I read about that you're getting ready to play right here. It's like, Marty, shut up and take your move.
Amazing.
Oh, okay. So we have probably about 30 minutes left. And y'all, we have a long list of games that we would recommend, extensive list, so we probably won't get through them all, of games that are broken up into different categories that you might be interested in. Let's say that you're I'm going to start. It's funny. I had a genre called area control. I'm like, almost every game's area control. That is a bad one. We're getting to the age of board games where genres really merge, and it's not a clearly defined thing. So I had area control, but one is kind of straightforward. And because he's on the panel, I got to start with it. Deck building. Deck building started with Dominion, right? If you're a board gamer, you know what deck building is. You got a starting set of cards and a deck. You modify that deck, you play a game. David and Trevor Benjamin here designed a system called Undaunted, which basically is your core deck building mechanic, but instead you're playing out some of the great battles and stuff of World War II. And y'all, for me, if you're wanting to get into historical games and you like deck building games, there is no better place to start than Undaunted. It's easy to learn. If you understand deck building concepts, you'll pick it up instantly, and you get to learn a little bit in the process.
And it's so tense.
Gosh,
you will be sweating when you're playing it. It's super good. And along in addition to Undaunted, because I actually love deck building, so that was definitely attractive to me for whenever I originally picked up Undaunted and fell in love with it. But there are also A Few Acres of Snow, which is a Martin Wallace game. And then Hands in the Sea, which came after. I can't remember the designer's name, but kind of built upon A Few Acres of Snow. But in Undaunted, you have a kind of modular map setup where you're playing cards to move your tokens and command your troops and units on the board. And A Few Acres of Snow and Hands in the Sea, the deck building is slightly different, and it almost looks like it feels a little more like a traditional war game a little bit with a board map and everything. But those are some like really good deck building kind of like hybrid war games that are just super fun and excellent.
I will say too that Undaunted really is a good intro into those types of war games with tokens and values on them. And they're getting used to just picking up a token and moving and looking at range and stuff. It's very straightforward, but it's one of those things that if you get into it, you may go, maybe those other ones that looked complicated before really aren't that complicated after all.
Right.
Any other on the deck building? And here's the thing, in chat, as we're talking about this, I'm sure there's a lot that we have not mentioned or anything like that. So throw them in the chat, and what we'll do is we'll mention them. So if you have any deck building, let me know. Now, the next category that we have here, it's probably one of my favorite card-driven games. I love cards. I love card games. And a lot of these intro games really are all about just kind of manipulation of cards and using those cards in special ways. So is there any of these that we have on the list that really stand out to y'all? Sam, we hadn't heard from you. What about you? What are card-driven games that really that you think would be a good for somebody who hadn't played a lot of historical games?
Card-driven games.
I'll put them on the spot, y'all.
Yeah, way to put me on the spot, because I was about to say something about Undaunted.
Do it.
Because I feel like
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Well, no, it's okay. It is kind of like a card-driven game as well, though. If you think about it, it's deck building, but it's also the thing that I love most about it, because I just learned Undaunted, was that your hand of cards ends up feeling like your little group of people on the board. And you start getting really attached to these cards. You're like, oh my gosh, if I don't move this guy right now, I might never get the opportunity again. And it like gets really, really stressful. And I was just remember thinking the whole time, I was like, I've never like sweated this much playing just like a game, just with cards and tokens and stuff. It was really, really stressful, but it was perfect with the theme of, like the World War. And I've never been interested in that theme, but having now played this game, I'm more interested in it because of how easy it was to get into it. And then those themes don't appeal to me at all. That was the reason why I never got Undaunted. So great work, David. I just am a huge fan.
So Sam, just wait until you play Stalingrad and your troop gets upgraded, and you know that if they die in Stalingrad, they never come back.
Yeah, see,
Ever.
no, that
And
sounds
you
terrible.
talking about stressful, dude. My gosh, there's a phase in Stalingrad where there's a casualty phase, and one of these are gone
Oh,
from the game. It's like,
gosh.
dear Lord, please don't let me draw the upgraded guy. Kick out, there he is.
I guess to jump back to the card driven game side of it. So yeah, I guess you could consider deck building is the game is driven by cards, but usually like a card driven game is a game where you have a hand of cards and you're making a decision of either triggering the event on the card or using the operation point value on it to do like some other actions. And sometimes you have a tough decision that if you play a card that's your opponent's faction, they can do it. So you have all these like really tough hand management decisions. And I don't know like what the first is it a Mark Herman design that was like the first card driven game? Yeah. And then it got like really popular with Twilight Struggle. So then like a series of games after that came out that were like Twilight Struggle light games. And I can't believe we also mentioned I just did a demo of Twilight Struggle Red Sea, which is the actual Twilight Struggle light game. But there are a lot of games where it has this like you have a hand of cards, you're playing against an opponent, and there's like a push and pull tug of war kind of mechanism. I think Watergate crushed it. Watergate adds a lot of really interesting things, but with that hand management. What were you going to say, David?
Well, I was just going to agree with you. And here's the thing about CDGs or card-driven games. First of all, it's been so heavily adopted in the historical wargaming community that you can basically play almost any topic, if any complexity, with a CDG like driven or card-driven game engine, right? So Candace is talking about Watergate. So that's a 30-minute political abstract game, or you can play a Twilight Struggle multi-hour long war theme game. It runs the gamut. And the cool thing about the card-driven games is by using that Candace, you talked about, it's the ops points, which are some like basic actions usually, and then the special event. Well, you can use the special event to do all sorts of interesting things, but you're offloading the rules complexity onto that card, which means learning the game is very simple, right? And so that's the sort of magic of card-driven games. I think it was We the People was the first game.
Yes,
I think that's right?
I think that's right.
The evolution
also.
is it's probably in the historical game genre. There's probably been no greater innovation than the card-driven game.
I love it. Oh, I love
I'm
card-driven
going
games.
to throw another thing towards David too. So he did a game called Europe Divided, which is, to me, felt like Twilight Struggle, but condensed down to a nice little 2-player 60-minute game. Another very clever way of using card-driven games. I like what you said there, David, the fact of simple rules, but the cards break the rules. And what makes that fun, too, is there's a lot of replayability. Because it's like, I didn't get to see the entire deck. So you may get a card next time that you didn't get to play before. I know one that I really enjoyed recently came from Fort Circle Games was Shores of AAA. Again, something else that I knew from history. Well, there's the song for, is it the Marines?
The Marines,
Shores of AAA. It's like, I had no clue what that was referencing to. So in the book I'm reading, I went, oh, that's cool. And so when you play the game, and by the way, the art on those cards are just absolutely gorgeous. Another card-driven game where the cards that you use are basically to move people around on a board and take control of different areas and move troops and everything, but very cleverly done, easy to learn, and very fast to play.
Yeah, I never even heard about that particular time in our history. So to learn about that through Shores of Tripoli was like, I don't know why I don't know any of this stuff. It's wild. Literally wild to me. It's such a cool part of history. It's like, wow, I would have never have known this if I hadn't have been sent this game. It just showed up on my door one day and I was like, this is awesome. The world. It's a great game.
Another real quick, another card-driven game that I feel like is very much a hidden gem is called Dual Powers Revolution 1917. And it does this thing where there's number one, you're playing cards to move units around and there's kind of an area majority scoring, but there are neutral units on the board as well. So one player at a time may have control over those people, and it's really interesting how they have you playing both sides. And then there's also a calendar mechanism, which I hadn't seen in any other game like this, where when you play a card, whatever card, you already have those like tough hand management decisions. They're kind of multi-use cards, but when you play a card, you move this calendar along, and if you hit over a certain space, you get to take a bonus action. So you're like not wanting your opponent to kind of hit that space. But anyway, that's another cool one to check out. Dual Powers Revolution 1917.
And
then they're block games.
Yeah, so just some other ones. One that just came out from Capstone Games that I loved, Fire and Stone Siege of Vienna. Yeah. Another one you didn't know anything about, and you read about it. Oh, that's cool. And what's really cool about some of those two-player games is they're asymmetric, where somebody plays a totally different way than the other way. That's the one I love, because you play as one side, then you get a totally different game when you play as the other side. That's another example of that. Hall and Nothing Game has a whole series of card games. 1815 Scum of the Earth is a good one, where you're trying to it almost is like it feels like Magic. You're trying to get cards out into a battlefield and fight each other. All right, so
I just got that one. Side note, I just got that one. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm so excited because I love LCGs, and I'm like, historical game, LCG mashup. Heck yeah!
That's exactly what it feels like, 100%. So block game. What do we mean by block game?
So block.
Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, I'll start at least and then pass it to you, David. So block war games are really cool. I think the very first block war game I played was Sekigahara, but both players have blocks, and you cannot see the stats on your opponent's block. So there's this like fog of war aspect, and that creates a whole nother type of tension, because you could sometimes move your units up and maybe they're not very strong, and it could be intimidating, and your opponent might have less, but they might be stronger. So you don't quite know. And I'll pass it to you, David, to fill in the blanks.
That's great. That's great. It's just, it's a really elegant way to introduce fog of war into the experience, right? And I mean, if you're new to war games or historical games, you're thinking about getting into it, every's played Stratego. Right.
I was about to say Stratego.
Yeah, I mean,
I've never played a block game, but I've played Stratego. So maybe
you've played Stratego, so you get the idea. And I mean, they're just like we talked about with card-driven games. There's tons of different block games that do all sorts of different things, right? But it's just a really elegant way to model that fog of war and to create all sorts of opportunities for bluffing, right? Like, you might have, and it's traditional on block war games to have each block has different strength values, and those values can change over time. So it's possible to send 3 blocks at your opponent. Your opponent might think, oh no, those 3 blocks are super powerful, and instead they're like 3 super weak blocks, but they don't know that, right? So yeah, Candace mentioned Sekigahara, which is an amazing game, super awesome. I will mention this one's maybe a little bit hard to get now. I'm not sure. It's called Santa Cruz 1797. It's gorgeous. It's very sort of like minimalistic, I would say, right? Very short, but it's also a very elegant game.
And it is hard to get, David. So
yeah,
thanks a lot for putting it on my radar now.
But it's amazing. And then there's, cool. I'm just going to flag one. This is called French and Indian War, 1757 through 1759. It's by Worthington Games. It's small, quick to play. But not only is it a block war game, but this is a very uncommon thing. It's written orders. So both players simultaneously write on a sheet of paper which blocks they want to move, and then that gets resolved simultaneously. And there's very few games. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing in sort of war gaming, but it's a very unusual mechanic, but it works out extremely well in combination. So, but again, really low complexity, quick playing game.
Before we move to the next category, somebody asked a question. This is really good. Do you have suggestions on how to reduce the barrier of entry for new players in light of the fact that not knowing the cards well puts them at a big disadvantage, which I've always heard. If you play Twilight Struggle against somebody that really knows the game, you're going to get the crap beat out of you because somebody knows the cards better. So do you have any suggestions for these card-driven games where the rules are simple, but once you know the cards is where it really shines.
Well, I mean, I would suggest starting with shorter games, right? And so if you like, it's a lot to ask somebody to come in and play Twilight Struggle for the first time, because not only are you asking them to learn the game, you're asking them to invest a bunch of time in learning the game. But we can sit down and play 2 games of Watergate in an hour, and by the time you've played it the second time, you're familiar with the cards, right? So
Yeah.
it's just a much lower investment to get brought up.
Or like in the case of like Shores of Tripoli, you play the American player, the teacher, because it's way harder to win as the American player. So you can kind of do that at least. You can give yourself the side that has the more work to do, or at least has maybe the harder position. That might help a little bit.
And I feel like I can't think of a specific example, but I feel like there are more games that are trying to do something like to design them to prevent that kind of thing from happening, where you can just like, oh, I know the cards better than you, so I'm probably going to win. Of course, again, I can't think of any specific examples, but
you know, but games like 13 Days or Watergate, those game designs do a good job of not requiring you to play certain cards in certain sequences, right? Those are more they're just less fragile designs, right? So you don't get to a situation where like, oh, you didn't play this card before the other card that you needed to do, and only you would know that if you played it before.
So the next category I'm excited about, because I don't know any of these games y'all listed, and I love worker placement games. So tell me about some good intro worker placement games for historical games.
Oh, well, I'll start with one that I just played earlier this week with David. So David and Trevor, that designed the Undaunted series and also War Chest, have a new game coming out later this year called General Orders World War II, which is a semi-abstract 2-player worker placement war game. And it's really cool because the rules are so streamlined and simple. Like every action you can do is very simple. But if you like worker placement games, number one, there aren't that many 2-player worker placement games. And this is like a really, really, really cool way to have a 2-player worker placement game work. But it also has all of the kind of tension of playing something like chess, like like a little bit of a tug of war, really like thinky. But yeah, so that game is really cool. And then there's Halls of Hegra, which I backed on Kickstarter. And that game looks like really incredible. I actually played a prototype of it and enjoyed it. And that kind of takes from the Robinson Crusoe kind of worker placement and takes it into a solitaire game that's really good.
Well, yeah, and here's the deal from I can't think of historical. I'm sure there's plenty of historical war games that I'm blanking on, the historical worker placement games that I'm blanking on them. In the war game domain, that's kind of it. There just aren't any, right? So this is a new thing now.
Yeah.
Now when Osprey posted that, hey, General Orders is the first worker placement war game, even going into that, I told him, well, Halls of Hegra hasn't come out yet, but Halls of Hegra is a worker placement war game. But people have started posting about this game called Napoleon's Conquest. I know nothing about it. It's a multiplayer, obviously Napoleonic game that is a worker placement war game, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, check that out.
Yeah, I just want to be honest. I haven't played any of these games, or I can't even think of like a worker placement war game that I played, or sorry, historical game that I played. So I am here to be taught, and I'm interested in all of these right now. So
well, it sounds
and there aren't many. So
yeah, it sounds like there's not that many.
It sounds like 2 of them are brand new. And David, I'm gonna have to hit you up because I want to try out this. I want to try General Order sometime. So count me in trying that out. All right. So what's really cool about historical games is that you're going to find is our next category, solo. Now, These are solo only games, but it seems like most historical games have a solo variant to them, which is really, really cool. So for solo only, the very top of the list, David has also created another series of games called the Valiant Defense series, which is so much flipping fun. If you're into solo games, check out his Valiant Defense series. For example, one of them's Pavlov's House. I recently played Labyrinth Ridge. Those are really nice. You got a Resist that you just recently did, which is also kind of a card. You know what it reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of, did you ever play Friday? The solo game Friday?
Yeah.
Where it's just a card-driven game. You're just playing cards and you're trying to beat the game. Resist has that feel to it.
I'm going to interrupt you there, Marty, for a second, because I don't think I've ever told anybody this, other than maybe Trevor when we were designing Resist. So, Candace, have you played Resist?
Not yet.
Okay.
I haven't.
All right. So here's the funny thing about Resist. So in Resist, the whole conceit of Resist is your Maquis, they're Spanish Maquis, the resistance fighters. You either play them hidden, in which case they're weaker, but they stay in your deck, or you reveal them, in which case they've been revealed because they acted overtly, which is a much more powerful thing, and you lose them, right? Like ostensibly they literally run to the hills because they're fleeing Franco's forces. Now, if I told you this is a game in which you could play the weaker version of the card and it stays in your deck, or you could play the more powerful version of the card and it's literally a CDG, right? I mean, that's all it is. You're playing the card for its event to come out, or you're playing it for right. So it is exactly a CDG, and no one has ever caught on to that or commented on it, but that's exactly what it is.
Interesting.
Right? So, that's cool.
Yeah.
That is real cool.
What about the others in the solo? Anybody want to give a shout out to these real quick? We got 10 minutes left, so we're going to try to rush through some of these.
Oh, so I added the Wars of Marcus Aurelius, and which was also re-implemented by Stilicho, Last of the Romans. They are almost like, I don't want to say like pandemic style games, but there are cards in them. They're excellent solo games from Hollenspiel. And actually, it's the same designer who made Fire and Stone, Siege of Vienna. So just to kind of like tie that back, those are really like awesome games. And then David has another one by Stealth and Sea, which is another great one. And then I kind of talked about Comancheria because that was like the first one that I started playing. That and Navajo Wars from GMT and Joel Toppin, really, really great. Like I feel like those are games that I'm still trying to grok. Like I will set them up periodically and just play. And I can't wait to get to a point where I can play more proficiently. But they're like really, really great designs on interesting topics too.
All right, so this next category I'm really, really excited about because there are people out there, a barrier to entry is, I don't like head-to-head. I don't want to play against somebody else. Can we just find a game we can play together like a co-op? Well, have we got a list for you? And I'm just going to throw out one I just mentioned earlier, Banish the Snakes, which recently came out by GMT. It's easy to learn. It's pandemic, y'all. It literally is pandemic. You're trying to flip cubes on a board, and the game is going, we're flipping them back. And so your goal is try to flip all the cubes. It is literally that straightforward. So Banish the Snakes for me. What about y'all?
Votes for Women is one that I've actually played on this list. And I've also played it solo. So I will say this could just as easily work for the solo. I will say it's more fun to fight for women's suffrage with other people. So it's definitely really fun as a co-op game. And I'm not super into co-op games, so I'm really not like the typical demographic for this, but I had to get this game because one, the message is so important. And I think that while you're playing it, you really do feel this sense of like, oh my gosh, we did it. Guys, this is great. And when you lose, it feels terrible, but it's still a really, really good game, and I really love it. And it's like, I mean, it's kind of another kind of like card-driven game as well. So a lot of these mix a lot of mechanics. Once you start playing these games, I feel like you have a lot of like ground tools to kind of move into other areas and feel a little bit more confident in them. So I don't know. I really think you should jump into that one because it's really easy to play and very fun, though.
I think another like one of the first, it's got to be the first historical cooperative game that I played was Freedom: The Underground Railroad. I cannot recall who the designer is, but it's from Academy Games. I think they're working on an expansion for it, by the way. But it is a game where you are working together to emancipate slaves, and you're trying to get them to Canada. And it's very it's a very sensitive subject, but it's very well done, in that it's kind of abstracted a little bit, but still very thematic, and it has cards with people historically who were there. I think it's excellent, and it's hard. It's hard.
Let's see. Okay, so moving on. So we had dice games here. There's a lot of games that involve dice. Academy series, Academy Games has a whole series called Birth of America series, which to me is also one of the easier games for moving little tokens on the map and
Area
recreating
control,
some
yeah.
historical. But it's more of an area control. Those are still available. The one listed here was 1775 Rebellion, but there are a lot of good dice games out there. The next one, Euro Resource Management. David turned me on to Quartermaster General. And what's the play for Quartermaster General as a good intro game, David?
Well, I think if you're a Euro gamer, Quartermaster General is a great introduction to historical wargaming for Euro gamers, because this is going to sound a little bit nerdy, but it's basically only input randomness. So what I mean by that is you shuffle your deck and you have cards, and those cards do what they say. There's no dice rolling. There's no sort of just attacking or anything like that, right? It's all managing your deck. It's also a team game, which can be good. Let's say you have an experienced player that could be in a team with inexperienced players and kind of help them along. So I think it's got a lot of special things going for us. It just kind of stands out in the genre. It's an easier on road to the genre from Euro game.
I have been dying to play it. I just picked up Quartermaster General World War I, but it kind of fell onto my radar because of War of the Ring, the card game, that was designed by Ian Brody.
Ian Brody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that kind of plunged me back to the Quartermaster General series. And I've had it, but I'm trying to wait until I have that right. I think five for the World War I, or I don't know if it's 6, but I want to have full player count. So I'm really excited to try it because I know a lot of people who love it. And I think someone at GMT Games Warehouse Weekend, when I was there in October, told me it was one of his favorite games. And that's what originally, even before the War of the Ring card game, that was what made me say, I got to check this out. So cool. I want to check it out.
We have next on the list Abstract. Now, the two games on here I think are really interesting. They were kind of most like quick lunch games from PSC Games, Blitzkrieg, and Caesar Rome in 20 minutes, which are very fast 2-player, kind of just about area control games. They're quick to set up, easy to play. Are they heavy thematic historically? Probably not, but you are replicating some of the things there.
Blitzkrieg is awesome. I haven't played Caesar as much, but I was just gonna say I don't think Blitzkrieg is really area control. It's a bag building, or you're kind of building chits in your bag, but there's a push and pull on all these different tracks. It is fantastic.
More like a tug of war.
Yes, it's like a tug of war on multiple tracks with other cool stuff. And it really is kind of easy to learn, quick to play. And I've gotten so many different people into it who aren't even into board gaming too much, and they love it.
That's awesome.
So
I will say that one thing I do get a question a lot is, Marty, I see you've been playing coin games. For me, who's never played a coin game, what's the good intro game? I'm like, there's not really one.
Actually, no, this is really important. Sam kind of alluded to it early on when you talked about Sam playing games that you have some connection to or familiarity with. And this is why I think I played Cuba Libre, which is often referenced as being the intro coin game. I played it. It didn't work for me. I played it. I was like, I don't really get it. It's kind of opaque. I played Liberty or Death, which is oftentimes viewed as a complex end of the world. And it clicked instantly. And it was night and day because I'm familiar with one and I'm not familiar with the other, right? The historical and background.
I will say one is coming, though. We know that Robin Hood It's supposed to be kind of like an intro into coin
Yeah.
game. Not historical per se, but I heard
Really excited about Fred's game. Yeah,
Yep.
he's a great designer. This is my favorite type of game on the planet. Asymmetric games are like my top games ever. And it's gonna take everything in my body to not just recommend Root and then you can get into coin. But you should try it. You should try Root. It's not a historical game, but it will give you a friendlier theme to kind of jump into and learn the dynamics of different asymmetric positions. And then if you want to learn history while doing that same thing, you can jump into coin games. For me, like David was saying, it actually wasn't Cuba Libre that got me into it. It was Falling Sky based on the theme. So I started with Falling Sky, and it really helped that I played Root, because little did I know Cole Worley, that little sneaky guy, freaking Falling Sky was a huge inspiration for making Root. You got, the government player, which is the Marquise the cat. I mean, they both have very, very similar actions and have the exact same position in the game. So it's really, really cool. I think coin is just an amazing system, but I would definitely say you got to start with a theme that is going to connect with you, because that will give you the extra kind of encouragement to really devote time learning it. But they're never easy to get into.
Go ahead,
Never.
And I'm going to kind of come from a different perspective on that, because I don't have a specific period of history that I love or that I'm passionate about. I am legit just excited to learn about everything. So to me, it wasn't just, as a different perspective, it wasn't a turn off. I was like, Cuban Revolution, I'm going to watch that Netflix whole documentary. I want to learn about this. And now I'm excited to play the board game. So like, for me, like, the games, they get me excited about the history. Then I want to buy a book. Then I start reading a book. I never finish them. but like that's just like, I'm just different in that way. But I totally agree with you guys. Like, if there's something you're very excited about, it's gonna make the barrier to entry a lot easier. But if you become like me, when you just start playing and like get excited by learning about all different aspects, talk to me in 5 years. Maybe I'll be like, oh, I like this specific thing and that's my favorite. But for now, I'm just like really enjoying like exploring and learning about everything.
That's fair.
So
I will say too, just one quick plug, intro to coin game for me that I just recently played. It's not historical, but it's good. Robotech Reconstructions. It implements 4 asymmetric factions from the world of Robotech. There is an event deck that works just like coin games, and you kind of get that feel of area control of 4 different factions. You get that down, you could easily jump to a coin game. Now, people have also asked me, Marty, what's the intro, levy, and campaign game? There's not one. Okay, there's just not one. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So not right now.
I love that series, and yeah, it's you're gonna have to. They just need more content on it. I want to make videos like how to play more approachable videos for these types of games. Obviously, I do tons of stuff on Root, but a really huge passion project of mine is to start doing some of the coin games, because I think I could teach them the same way that I did the Root videos, where you have an individual video for each player position.
100%.
We just need that stuff online. It's a lot of work though, and a lot of time, but I really want to do it because I think these games are just huge untapped potential for people. They hear asymmetric and they're like, I don't want to learn 4 board games. And it's like, you don't have to, trust me.
It's not vast. It's not vast.
Yeah, it is not vast. It's not vast.
In
Yeah,
fact,
which vast is phenomenal.
Right before this panel, I watched the history of Inferno so I can understand the history of that game before I start learning it. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up. What we're going to do is going around the horn so everybody can tell us where we can find you, your YouTube channel. I do have everybody's Twitter handle in the bottom of their frame. So here's the thing, y'all. If you want to see Sam do in-depth videos on the different factions of some coin games, which I think will be super amazing, Sam, where can they find that?
They can find it at Lord of the Board on YouTube. That's going to be the main spot. I'm also on Instagram, also on Twitter. But yeah, the main videos are on YouTube.
Candace, where can we find some of your most amazing? I need to learn your interview skills. I really do. Where can we find your stuff?
You can find my Cardboard Creations interviews on the Board Game Geek YouTube channel. And also I host the Board Game Geek podcast. So if you want to hear me babble on about board games every other week, you could subscribe to that. And I'm on Twitter at Candy Drum, and that's Candy with an I.
And the three of us would not be able to make any content if it wasn't for wonderful people like David Thompson giving us games to talk about. So David, you're too busy to make videos and podcasts. Just let us handle that. You make the games. Where can they find out more about that?
The best place to get a hold of me is either on Twitter or on Board Game Geek.
Fantastic. Thank y'all so much for watching. Share this video, like this video, subscribe. Make sure to go follow everybody else's content. Enjoy the rest of your SD Hist online, and we hope to see you maybe face-to-face sometime soon. And remember, go tell Sam we need factions for every coin game that's out there.
Please.
Faction videos. That would be it. Go tell him what coin game he should start with first. How about that?
There we go. There we go.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Fire in the lake.
There you go.
Sheesh.
See y'all.
Have a good one.